Good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. I'm so glad that you joined us this morning as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio because we have a lot to talk about this morning. I do want to remind you, coming up on Thursday, we'll be talking with Sheriff Jim Allard. That's at Thursday. And on Friday, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano will join us. We have other guests throughout the week, but those are two I wanted to highlight right off the jump here on the program. We got our first virtual wave. If you're new to the program, that number on the bottom of the screen, you can reach out at any time and weigh in on the issues or just wave. Get that virtual wave in there. We've got a couple New York issues, obviously a lot about the presidential race that we'll be getting to as well. No, we will not be talking about the Golden Globes. I'm sure there's other outlets where you can find that kind of information. Governor Hochul, as an update from something I brought to you, well, we've been talking about a lot lately, but we probably broke this story a couple months ago, and that is the scourge of shoplifting in New York, where businesses are actually leaving because of the financial loss, and of course you have businesses not even considering moving to New York because of public safety, because of the business climate. Well, Governor Hochul will pledge to crack down on retail theft as part of her 2024 policy agenda, as fed-up New York businesses continue to plead for help with this shoplifting scourge. Merchants are turning up the heat on Hochul and the Democrat-led state legislature, calling for stiffer penalties against serial offenders wreaking havoc in their stores. Nelson Eusebio of the National Supermarket Association said, "We're going to continue living this nightmare if legislators don't fix this mess." Now, a lot of this has to do with the recent rules put into place, like the bail reform, where there is no real trouble if you get caught shoplifting, or you have younger people that will not get in any sort of legal trouble because they're too young. "We plan on being more active in Albany this year. We're bringing up shopkeepers from legislators' districts to get in their faces," he said. Lawmakers whiffed last year, refusing to pass, among others, a bill that would have increased the severity of charges for certain repeat shoplifters, making it possible for them to be held on bail. Yes, heaven forbid, held on bail. The legislature instead passed just one bill, which created a task force to study the shoplifting issue, and that was vetoed by Governor Hochul. Well, Governor Hochul does very little. Like when it came to reform, with bail reform, just changed it just a little bit, and then goes out and talks about public safety being her number one priority because it hurt her so much in the last election against Zeldin, because Zeldin ran on public safety, where she ran on basically abortion, and it ended up hurting her. Now, obviously, she won, but I think she sees what could be a real problem in her future. Governor Hochul's office Sunday said the governor had heard the message and would be unveiling a plan to stem shoplifting during her State of the State address on Tuesday. So there you go. Meanwhile, Assemblyman Jeff Dinowitz from the Bronx said his measure to change recidivist shoplifters, charge them with fourth-degree grand larceny, a Class E felony that could be a bailable offense, remains high on his to-do list. This has to be a priority as long as our shopkeepers are suffering. We all know shoplifting is a problem, of course. I mean, when you have literally businesses and store owners leaving the state or closing down shop because it is not sustainable any longer, the shoplifting. And it ties in with this loose-on crime attitude of New York. We're going to talk about one other thing when it comes to New York here in just a moment. Feel free to weigh in this morning on all the issues of the day. We will be right back after this short break. Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. A little bit snowy there on Marcus Street this morning. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I am your host, Frank Acom. So back to New York, we were talking about shoplifting. Now we move to something completely different. A growing number of states and local municipalities are launching task forces and programs to examine possible reparations for Black American descendants of enslavement and Jim Crow era discrimination, a once fringe idea that's increasingly going mainstream. So the reparations movement is having another moment, according to Axios. There's no longer a niche conversation. This is no longer a niche conversation. This is something that we have to do, said New York State Representative Mikel Solage. We're going to keep an eye on that. I know it came up last year at the end of session, and they're putting together a task force, which will be interesting because we saw what happened in California. We actually talked about this with former Congressman Joe Sempolinski, I think his last go-around, meaning his last time on the show, about what this will do. It just divides, of course, the state further. In California, you had Governor Newsom do similar. That's why we normally copy it. As a fact, and when all was said and done, they couldn't afford it. So I'm not really sure the end game. Hey, did you see? We have so much news for you this morning. We're giving you all the news. I said I wasn't going to bring up awards, but this is a little different. Barack Obama has won, I believe it's his 5th Emmy. This was on Sunday during the Creative Arts Emmy Awards. It was for his outstanding narration on the Netflix documentary Working, What We Do All Day. It was a 4-part series that debuted in May on Netflix. Okay. We're covering it all this morning, folks, right here on Frankly Speaking. There's a new poll out from Gallup. I know, I'm not even trying to segue at this point. I'm just jumping around. There's a new poll from Gallup before we get into the presidential race. Obviously, we're nearing, how many days away? I think it's on the 15th is when Iowa is. So we're nearing Iowa. The former president has court dates and rallies. It's going to be very interesting. We may get a chance to talk about that on the program a little bit later on. But a record low, according to Gallup. I think I have that up to put on the screen. Yes. A record low, according to a new poll out from Gallup, shows, and there you go, that the U.S. is a record low and U.S. satisfied with the way democracy is working. Now, when we first started this program, back in March, we said one of the goals was really to bring back this kind of unity as much as we can. Obviously, it's just our own little slice of the world, but bring back this feel of community, because at the time there was a poll that said people were losing faith in their communities, unfortunately, faith in our country. This just echoes that poll. A new low of 28% of U.S. adults are satisfied with the way democracy is working in the country. The current figure is down from the prior low, 35%, measured shortly after the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Gallup has asked Americans about their satisfaction with U.S. democracy 9 times since 1984. The high point came in the first reading when 61% of Americans were satisfied. Wow, that's changed from 1984. They said it started going down back in 1992, the year often referred to of the angry voter, in the wake of an economic recession and congressional scandals. In June of 1992, when insurgent third-party candidate Ross Perot led presidential preference polls, 36% of Americans were satisfied with the way democracy was working. All right, we're going to talk when we come back about, did you see this about Lloyd Austin? There's a couple different ways to look at this. Lloyd Austin left the president and the administration, the White House, in the dark as he was checked into a hospital. No one knew it for quite a few days. Caught the White House off guard. Many people are angry. We're going to take a look at what that means. Of course, Lloyd Austin is a U.S. Defense Secretary. We're going to talk about that when we come back. I don't want to run too late, so stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Monday morning. Okay, so Lloyd Austin left the Biden White House in the dark over his hospitalization, and it raises a lot of questions. A lot of people are very upset over this. Some saying heads will roll over this. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's secret hospitalization has raised several questions after senior U.S. officials, including President Joe Biden, were kept in the dark for days about the condition of the country's most senior defense official. Austin was admitted to the Walter Reed Military Medical Center on January the 1st. He suffered, quote, complications following a recent elective medical procedure. A U.S. official told Reuters that the president was informed on Thursday, and that was Thursday evening, several days after Austin was admitted to the hospital. A Biden administration official told CBS News that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the White House's National Security Council were told on Thursday morning. Now, there was also, it gets a little bit worse here, too, because he actually said he'd be working from home, which wasn't unusual, but he never was even really on the, I guess you would call it Zoom or whatever they were using, never really working from home. He was actually in the hospital. The days of secrecy raised pressing questions about the severity of the defense secretary's illness, why other government officials were not informed, and what contingency plans were in place during Austin's stint in the hospital. There couldn't have been any contingency if no one knew that he was in. The lack of disclosure with other high-ranking officials goes against established practice and comes at a time of heightened international tensions and demands on the U.S. Defense Department. Yes, if you think about, and that's the big question. We're going to get to it. I'm kind of avoiding the issue, but the New York Post has a great piece saying, how could the White House not realize he was absent for that many days? With everything going on in the world, at home, doesn't matter. How can the defense secretary of the United States just not show up for nearly a week? According to Politico, quote, someone's head has to roll. White House and Pentagon aides insist that Austin's job is not in jeopardy, at least not yet. But they are sticking to the line despite seeming to lack full information about what's actually been going on at the Pentagon. The precise nature of Austin's surgery, medical complications, and even his current condition remain unclear or addressed only in vague terms. Senior Defense Department and White House officials still don't know the details of this procedure. So there still is no information. So heads, according to Politico, are going to roll. There's a quote here at the end of the piece, again, coming from Politico, that says, not telling the White House, Congress, or the media that he is sick, and then telling Pentagon staff he is working from home is next level. This is a problem, said one former senior DOD official. Someone made the decision not to disclose. That person will likely be gone shortly. Well, what if it's Austin himself? But the major question, which we will get to when we come back, I don't want to run too late this morning, is how could President Biden not notice his defense secretary was missing? I think that's a fair question to ask. We're also going to talk, that's when we come back, we're also going to talk about the Biden administration in general as we near Iowa and we start to have the lengthy conversations about the presidential race, which we've already had numerous ones. But I would love to hear from you. But we're going to be talking about that, of course, the next few weeks, probably the whole year, as I continue to keep saying. But as always, before we go to break, you can contact me. That is our information. Text me or leave me a voicemail. That's the best way to reach out and weigh in. What do you think? How could President Biden not notice his defense secretary with everything going on in the world? How could he not know that he was essentially missing, that he had gone, not AWOL, I won't use that term, but it had gone missing. And the people around him hid it. Still not, according to Politico, still not fully transparent on what the procedure was, what the illness was, how he's doing. We as a country, I would think, deserve to know. But at the very least, I would say the White House deserves to know. And again, it's at a very, very troubling time internationally, as we've got Ukraine, we've got Israel, Hamas, you name it. So how could Biden not notice? Well, you weigh in on it. Feel free to contact me at any time during the program. We've got to take another short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, as we broadcast from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. I asked the question, how could President Biden, well, I didn't ask it, the New York Post did, how could President Biden not notice his defense secretary was missing? We received a message from a viewer. You are thinking that Biden has any idea what is going on in the White House. They have their perfect puppet. That won't change. Well, to the point made by the New York Post, and keep those comments coming in, please, at any time. All right. How could he not know? Well, according to the New York Post editorial board, with U.S. forces under regular attack across the Mideast, and the Navy actively engaged with Houthi forces in the Red Sea, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was out of commission in the hospital from Monday on. And that's the question. With so much going on, how did someone not have a conversation with him is the question. Worse, no one told the White House. Worse yet, President Biden nor National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan even noticed. And that may be the key takeaway from this. Not just that there seems to be some questionable procedures here, that they hide this hospitalization. They say, no, he's just working from home. A lot of red flags. No real information out yet on his condition or what the issue is. But that the National Security Advisor and the President of the United States had no idea, did not notice. Not until the Pentagon let Sullivan know on Thursday. Anyone thinking that the nation is well led, despite Biden's blatant feebleness, better think again. Austin and his deputies ignored the law here, while Sullivan was plainly asleep at the switch. Again, with American forces under fire, and our friends in Ukraine and Israel fully at war with Russia and Hamas. Oh, and by the way, insult to injury, maybe in a way, the public was left in the dark until Friday. Meanwhile, Austin's surprise hospitalization left Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks filling in for days from her vacation in Puerto Rico. Biden returned Tuesday from another vacation in the Caribbean and presumably focused the rest of the week on preparing for his speech on Friday, declaring that, of course, democracy is in danger because of Trump. I don't know if you watched any of his speech over the weekend, but we knew that was going to be his campaign speech. No surprise, but we're going to hear a lot more of that as we near November. But Sullivan, we go back to Jake Sullivan. Sullivan is a glorified intern who in the days before Hamas's October 7th atrocities was literally bragging about how Biden's leadership had made the Middle East safer than ever. He's also part of the Biden, quote, brain trust that still thinks we can make Iran our friend if we just close our eyes tight enough and come up with sufficient large bribes. So it's no surprise that he was utterly clueless about the defense secretary going, well, they used it AWOL. We've generally been relieved that Austin, an experienced but non-senile adult, is near the top of the national security chain of command, even though he couldn't talk Biden out of his disastrous plan for leaving Afghanistan. But his failure and his staff's to alert the guy with the football here is damning. And that Biden and Sullivan, heck, the entire National Security Council, and this is the point, didn't even notice is beyond damning. It's proof positive that the safety of our country and of U.S. forces not drawing combat pay is off the radar for days at least at a time. At least. How can Democrats dare to nominate Biden for a second term now? I don't think that's overhyped at a time of real questions about national security. I mean, how many people have come out and said there's potential for terrorist attacks, these type of things, and yet our defense secretary missing in action. Former President Trump went to Truth Social to say, quote, failed Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin should be fired immediately for improper professional conduct and dereliction of duty. He has been missing for 1 week, and nobody, including his boss, crooked Joe Biden, had a clue as to where he was or might be. He has performed poorly and should have been dismissed long ago, along with General Mark Milley, for many reasons, but in particular, the catastrophic surrender in Afghanistan, perhaps the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. So that's the former president weighing in. I don't think the media is covering it a little bit. I don't think they do so begrudgingly, because it is really a stain against President Biden, if they were to cover it fairly, meaning the media, if they were to cover it as if this were, let's say, the Trump administration, or if this were the George W. Bush administration, how would they cover it compared to what we're seeing here? Now, there is some. I'm full disclosure. I saw, I believe on CNN this morning, more questions surround one of those type of headlines. But yes, it definitely raises some concerns. How could the White House not even be aware that he was missing? And why are they being so secretive? Why do we not know more information as the public? But why specifically does the National Security Advisor and the president not know more about his condition, what the actual case is here? We got another comment this morning. Why does my gut feeling tell me that the government feels like a house of cards propped up by the media and Democrats spin? I feel very anxious about the future of things. Thank you to that viewer. We're starting off Monday with anxiety. I get it. This is very troubling to me. It really is. As someone, the defense secretary of defense, can essentially go missing for nearly a week and no one notices. No one says, "Hey, where's Lloyd been? I didn't see him at the weekly meeting," or whatever the case may be. It is very troubling. Now, Obama, and I don't think it's because about anything to do with this, but Obama's worried about Trump. This is not the first time we've had an article like this. I think Obama recognizes the popularity, if you will, of the former president, because he was one that was signaling the alarms back in the Hillary Clinton race. Former President Barack Obama has raised questions about the structure of President Biden's re-election campaign, discussing the matter directly with Biden and telling the president's aides and allies the campaign needs to be empowered to make decisions without clearing them with the White House. Three people speaking with anonymity on the issue that are familiar with the conversations. Obama grew animated in discussing the 2024 election and former President Donald Trump's potential return to power, and has suggested to Biden advisors that the campaign needs more top-level decision makers at the headquarters in Delaware, or it must empower the people already in place. And he went on to not name anybody specifically, but kind of give what he had during his 2008 race, which was David Plouffe. He also said during the launch, Obama noted the success of his re-election campaign structure in 2012. When some of his top presidential aides, including David Axelrod and Jim Messina, left the White House to take charge of the re-election operation in Chicago. I will say, and this is not any type of criticism, it may actually be their game plan, but I do feel that the Biden campaign itself, the apparatus itself, has been very slow. We know he sort of had his kickoff. Was it on Friday that he gave that speech? I think, yeah, Friday. So kind of the kickoff there. Of course, not saying anything we didn't know was going to be the main talking points, the threat to democracy, that over and over again. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But it seems as if they're not doing a lot. So will that be their campaign strategy like last time? I know it became cliche, but the campaign run from a basement. Maybe thinking that they can stay quiet, give a speech every once in a while, knowing that the media will praise the speech. He'll have an opportunity to knock Trump as a threat to democracy. Do that a few times and maybe call it a day. I mean, I don't think that's a successful game plan this year because there's not the excitement behind this administration. Last time it was almost let's get Trump out of there. It's not so much pro-Biden. It was maybe an anti-Trump vote. You could look at it that way. This time it's not that because a lot of people aren't happy with either, or definitely not happy with what Biden has quote-unquote accomplished. But of course there's a concern about his age and his mental and physical health. So there's not the excitement to get out and vote for him. And there's real concern amongst Democrats. And I think that's why Obama, because this isn't his first time having this, if you will, lecture with Biden's campaign. Obama has long harbored worries about Trump's political strength, telling Biden during a different private lunch last summer that Trump is a more formidable candidate than many Democrats realize. He cited Trump's intense, loyal following, a Trump-friendly conservative media ecosystem. I know they quoted that in the past. This is from the Washington Post, by the way, that's what he had told Biden. But I don't know where this Trump-friendly conservative media ecosystem really is. Honestly, maybe I'm being naive. Are they just talking about Fox? Is that an ecosystem? Anyway, and a polarized country as advantages for the former president 2024, and it is not mentioned here, but I'm sure Biden is aware of it, that the polls are showing it, Democrats are saying it behind the scenes, that there is major concern with people's feelings towards the president's mental and physical health. And I don't think some of these speeches help. There are lots of flubs, lots of gaffes, especially when he goes off teleprompter, and just a lot of awkwardness. But we're going to talk about the presidential race here when we come back. I can't run too late. As always, you can reach out to me. Thank you for those that have commented so far this morning. It's Monday. We've got a lot to catch up on. We're going to try to get to as much of it as we possibly can. A few things here about DeSantis, some speculation that he may drop out after Iowa. We'll tell you about that. Again, it's from an anonymous source, so take it with a grain of salt. What Nikki Haley's up to, and I hate to say this, it's not a criticism on anybody. Because of the town halls and the upcoming debate, which I think the debate this week is on the 10th, I kind of forgot that Chris Christie was still in it, and Ramaswamy, but I knew he was in it, but they're still in it. Not really sure the reasoning there. A lot of people are saying, why does he not back out so there could be more unity towards maybe a Nikki Haley or a DeSantis, more, maybe see an uptick in the poll that could bring that person over the edge to defeat Trump in one of these early primary states. But Chris Christie, we've got to remember, is about himself and how he always has been. It's about getting the attention. I think he is looking for, searching for, seeking, begging maybe even for to be a political talking head on some network. He just seems to have the Joe Scarborough drive, if you will, whatever is politically expedient to get you that job. But we do have to take a short break, so stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. Look at that beautiful view of Marcus Street here in downtown Corning. That's where we broadcast live from the Hesselson's studio. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Thanks again for joining us this morning. So Biden is returning to South Carolina, hoping the state can save him yet again. If you recall, really saved him the last go-round. The state's February 3rd Democratic primary is not competitive, but with many black voters saying in polls and Democrat focus groups they feel disengaged and disenchanted with the political process. South Carolina, far from a battleground in the general election, will be the first electoral test of how deep a hole Biden is actually in. With the campaign trailing in early polling of the general election, and some even in his administration thinking he is too weak to be mounting a re-election. This is interesting. This is coming from CNN. Not typical of CNN here to criticize the president, but Biden has been trying to get the country to agree with him that the future of democracy depends on his winning. Really? The heck you say? He's going to do that? He made that argument Friday in an impassioned speech near Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, where George Washington and his army survived a brutal winter and went on to win the Revolutionary War. And then he's heading to Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston this week as well. So South Carolina now, speaking of South Carolina, James Clyburn, representative, the South Carolina Democrat, who was very key to Biden's win back in 2020, warned that the president and his campaign messaging are not breaking through what he calls the MAGA wall. Now, they're going to bring up MAGA a lot. They're going to bring up threats to democracy a lot. We have to be prepared for that in the media and politicians and talking heads. Clyburn said, "I'm not worried. I'm very concerned." The congressman said he sat down with Biden to convey his concerns. It is interesting that Biden decided to run for re-election only because so many people were telling him maybe to think twice before running for re-election. But also remember when he said that very, I think, kind of cocky quote, which was, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I wouldn't be running if Trump wasn't running, meaning that he's the only one that can beat Trump. But then he went on later saying that others could beat Trump as well. Then why wouldn't, and I know there's been a lot of Democrats who have said this, then if you believe there's others, then step aside. Because who was it, that one talk show host said, we appreciate you running to defeat Trump, but it's kind of like saying you've got our back in a street fight. We appreciate the thoughtfulness but still don't really like our chances. So a lot of saying, why would you not step down if you believe there's others that could beat Trump? Now, the congressman said that he did sit down with him, as I mentioned. He noted that while he has no problem with the Biden administration and what it has done, he worries about how the president and his campaign have been unable to convey the success of Biden's administration to voters. My problem is that we have not been able to break through the MAGA wall in order to get to people exactly what this president has done. Well, what's the MAGA wall? That's confusing to me. Is that a group of people? Is that some type of conservative media? What is the MAGA wall? It's just very difficult, and I've said it a million times on this program, it's difficult to go to the American people, whether it's through ads or rallies or James Clyburn giving a speech or whoever, to tell us how good the economy is when we all go to the grocery store. We all go to the gas station. We see what that does to our paycheck each week. So I think it's hard to sell Bidenomics, and that's what people behind the scenes, again, all anonymous sources, so take it with a grain of salt, but anonymous sources saying Joe Biden, when he tries to sell himself and his record, he loses. So they're demanding behind the scenes that he go after Trump and run that kind of campaign, which seems to be the case. I mean, that's what we saw in Friday's speech, that it is going to be not about how good I'm doing, which you would kind of hope from a president. It's about how bad the other guy is. I don't know if that's a winning strategy. Now, Miranda Devine at the Post says, Joe Biden certainly knows how to wield his power to transform the country for the worse. Now, this is, again, Miranda Devine. We're going to talk about that when we come back from break. Please feel free to weigh in. We've covered a lot this morning. The Biden campaign, Lloyd Austin, anything else you'd like to mention as the show's just going fast, so I don't want to miss anything. So you see the number on the bottom of your screen. Oh, I forgot to add a wave before. Feel free to wave or feel free to weigh in on the issues that we've been discussing this morning. And we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio on Marcus Street in Corning. Received this from a viewer. I wonder if Biden will run from his basement again with a repeat of virus lockdowns and mail-in voting or major war. That's the only way I see him winning. There has been speculation by many, with changing of the rules, with absentee ballots and the like, what that will mean for voting. I don't know if if that's going to be their campaign, which is to run from the basement, just take that part side and like he did last time. I just don't think that momentum's there, and I think the polling shows that momentum's not there, that will not be a successful campaign strategy. But I mentioned this before break, this coming from Miranda Devine. Joe Biden certainly knows how to wield his power to transform the country for the worse. Joe Biden let slip a telling boast after his latest speech. Quote, I understand power, he whispered into the microphone as the First Lady wrangled him off the stage, while he was probably doing a kind of a self-deprecating cliche about the wife controlling the husband. I understand power also was a statement of unwavering confidence in his own mastery of today's political landscape. It's hard to admit, given Biden's manifest frailties and incompetence, but he's right. The president does know how to use power to transform the country. By being willing to lie and cheat and break every political norm, by using his Department of Justice to turn onto his main rival and ignoring cries of foul, by hysterically overhyped the January 6th Capitol riot, by hatefully demonizing conservatives as domestic terrorists and white supremacists, by dividing the country when he promised to unite us, he achieves his political ends. And unfortunately, I know he ran as a unifier, but I think anybody that paid attention and saw what he was saying knew that would not be the case. And he's, of course, proven that is not the case. He has divided us even further. By dismantling border protections, for instance, he has allowed 8 million and counting illegal aliens to upend demographics and refresh Democrat voter rolls in the future. That is his legacy of change, according to Miranda Devine, as well as his corrosive equity agenda, which is entrenched in the psyche of a growing number of Americans, that it's a gnawing racial grievance, an entitlement that knows no end. And so she goes on, again, this Miranda Devine at New York Post. She said, what did Donald Trump achieve of any lasting value in the 4 years he had power? Clearly, he was a better president on every important measure: the economy, the border, foreign affairs, energy policy. But every achievement of Trump's was undone on day one by Biden. And he was proud of that. I mean, that was part of his campaign. So there's no surprise there. That's why the borders have been so open and porous, because he had to prove that he wasn't Trump. And many of his aspirations were foiled by Biden's deep state allies, meaning Trump's. Power is all Biden has ever cared about. In his dismal first speech of the election season near Valley Forge, Biden used the word 13 times. He said insurrection or insurrectionist 11 times. So he said power 13 times, insurrection or insurrectionist 11 times, because that is how he intends to hang on to power, by fashioning his entire campaign pitch around January 6th and Trump's threat to democracy. Biden's dishonest deception of the riots as something far worse than it really was is out of kilter with the way 73% of Americans in a weekend CBS poll see it. They see it as 73% see it as a protest that went too far. But it's no coincidence that his speech coincided with strategic leaks from special counsel Jack Smith's January 6th probe, which cast Trump as an insider-in-chief. Exactly the question that has been dumped into the lap of the Supreme Court by Biden proxies in Colorado and Maine, as 32 other states consider removing Trump from the ballot on insurrectionist grounds. 32 other states, so think about that, to remove the number one nominee from the ballot. And yet we are going to be lectured about who is a threat to democracy for the next however many months. Not one person, Miranda Devine highlights, of the 1,200 charged over the Capitol riot has been charged with insurrection. Not one. And we've already seen how this is being misused at another level, where they go after Trump, but now they're going after a representative who was a supporter of Trump, saying that he shouldn't run. And again, yet we are told that Trump is the one that destroys all the norms, or that Trump is the one that is a threat to democracy. Trespassing, by the way, is the main crime they're being charged with, if you're curious. It's hard to see this witch hunt as anything but the transformation of the DOJ into an election year political weapon, because now they're going after people not just that went into the Capitol, they're talking about going after people that were just there, even outside of the Capitol. Think of that. I know many people that attended, not knowing that, of course, it would lead to what it ultimately did inside the Capitol, and many people were there and didn't even know what was going on in the Capitol. They were outside what they considered a rally. Democracy came up 30 times in Biden's speech, too. Apparently, it's, quote, on the ballot. The alternative to democracy is dictatorship, he thundered. It's a bizarre statement for the president of a nation that was founded deliberately, not as a democracy, but as a constitutional republic, precisely to avoid the tyranny of the majority, which James Madison warned about. That's why we have an electoral college. Biden's pursuit of power at any cost is behind his insidious new eulogies to democracy. Yes, it's tempting to mock Biden's overblown rhetoric, his slurred words and inability to read a teleprompter, his robotic gait and ridiculous lies. But his advantage is his fearlessness and lack of shame. We continue, just to wrap it up before we take our next break because we are running late. You may understand that the various legal prosecutions against Trump are bogus and that Biden has weaponized the justice system in a deliberate, explosive way. But there are a lot of independents in this country who don't keep up with the news and still believe that you don't get indicted on 91 felonies, and you certainly don't get convicted unless you did something wrong. Some may even still believe in Honest Joe. You may rail against their ignorance and naivete, but they will decide the election. Think of that. That's from Miranda Devine. Stay with us. We will be right back, Frankly Speaking, here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We have to take another short break coming up. It'll be our last break of the program. But I received this comment before we talk about the Republican side of the presidential race. This coming from a viewer. You have the group that will automatically vote for the ham sandwich, meaning, if it has a D, the person has a D next to their name, they're automatically getting that certain group of Democrat votes. It has to be constantly exposed how many people are living day to day, because they have to decide on eating or gas, paying rent, or for food. How illegal immigrants are getting more from the federal government than citizens. It is next to impossible to buy a new house. Those are all good points. I believe the former president will be running on similar points. I would also believe that if DeSantis or Nikki Haley does good in Iowa or whatever and they stay in it, we would probably see the same from them. We're going to talk about DeSantis when we come back. So stay with us. This is our last break of the hour, and we're going to wrap things up. We're going to go fast. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Another comment from a viewer. Biden is the threat to democracy, and his hate speech was sickening. I believe that's in reference to Friday's speech. And anyone who can't see this now just doesn't want to see it for what it is. Insulting and hate-filled. Now, that's not presidential. Now, we have made the comment in the past that he ran to be a unifier. I do not believe we ever saw that. We see from his speeches trying to divide us even more, as Miranda Devine pointed out, calling conservatives essentially domestic terrorists. But to the Republican side of things, is DeSantis going to drop out of the race on January 15th? That's the question being asked at the Hill. And specifically, Douglas McKinnon said, I've heard from two people very familiar with the DeSantis campaign, a major donor and a high-level political operative, that if the Florida governor loses the Iowa caucuses to former Trump, as he's expected, or former President Trump, as he's expected to do, on the night of January 15th, he would either drop out of the race that night or make his announcements the next morning. Now, the DeSantis campaign denies this assertion. This op-ed has been updated, it says here, to include the following statement from the campaign. Ron DeSantis is in this for the long haul. Well, more than that, the two people that he spoke with believe that DeSantis will very begrudgingly endorse Trump for president. Okay, interesting. We'll keep an eye on that. DeSantis did slam the door shut on being Haley's VP. He said, I'm not going to accept that under any circumstances. I'm running for president because I think we need somebody that can win and get the job done. I would much rather do my final 2 years as a governor than be vice president. I don't think it's a position that offers much. I want to make an impact. Okay. So, man, we are getting near Iowa. This is getting exciting. Liz Cheney really echoing Biden's talking points, saying that primary voters in New Hampshire have to stand against GOP cowardice. Speak for us all. Tell the world who we are with your vote. Tell them that we are good and a great nation. But make sure they know that we do not bend, we do not break, and we do not yield in the defense of our freedom. Show the world that we will defeat the plague of cowardice sweeping through the Republican Party. Then she said, this was at Dartmouth, she gave a speech, because Republicans aren't normally welcome on college campuses. This is different because she's bad-mouthing Republicans. She went on to say that she supported these measures to take Trump off the ballot. Our nation can survive and recover from policy mistakes. We cannot recover from a president willing to torch the Constitution. So essentially throwing her support behind Biden, saying we can overcome his mistakes. We can't overcome someone that's a threat to democracy. That's Liz Cheney. She'll get a lot of coverage there. We are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to everybody who joined us. We'll be back tomorrow morning starting at 7 right here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I look forward to it. Alrighty, we'll see you tomorrow.